DVB, Digital Fast.
Hello and welcome to the DVB Newsroom. I'm English news host Nora. Joining me today is Nicholas Koumjian, head of the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. Nicholas, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
On August 11, you released the IIMM 2026 annual report. Can you share some of your latest findings from Myanmar?
Well, unfortunately, what we've found in our work is that the very serious international crimes continue to occur, that it's having an impact throughout the country from east to west, from north to south. And civilians are the ones that are bearing the brunt of the conflict. They're the ones being hit in airstrikes, dying. We've also seen many thousands detained, including individuals detained simply for criticizing the junta-run elections. So unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of good news to pass along, but I think it's important to pass along the news that this very serious situation continues. We did talk about our work sharing evidence. We have been sharing for many years with three processes at the International Criminal Court, at the International Court of Justice, and in Argentina. They're all in various stages. They're somewhat advanced, but none of them in trial. You have the ICC. The prosecutor requested a warrant in November 24, almost 2 years ago now. And the ICJ, we're expecting a judgment this year. And in Argentina, the judge, still in the investigation phase, had summoned 25 suspects and it was announced that she was issuing warrants for their arrest. There's also been attempts in other parts of the world to file universal jurisdiction cases. Some of those appear not to have been successful. Some are still ongoing. And our team is really looking to try to be creative and see where there could be opportunities for the evidence we collect to achieve some level of justice for Myanmar. And one of the areas that we're looking at is in our financial crimes unit, who is supplying the means that are being used for crimes? This could be a violation of international law. It's difficult to prove, but if you can prove that an individual or entity knows that they are facilitating the commission of very serious crimes, and it has a serious effect on the crimes, they could be held guilty for aiding and abetting those crimes, even if that was not their intent. If they know it and they continue to do it, they can be held responsible. But that's still, as I said, difficult to prove. A little easier, though sometimes these are violations of the laws in the countries where the companies or individuals are operating, because the countries may have sanction laws that prevent people from supplying weapons in this kind of scenario or equipment that's being used for military purposes. So we have been in touch with several national jurisdictions, and they're at an early stage of looking at opening investigations of those. And I feel somewhat optimistic that this will pay off in the future, and we could achieve some, I think, concrete progress on these cases.
The report says war crimes and crimes against humanity have increased. What does this look like on the ground?
What it looks like on the ground is kids in schools being bombed, parents being afraid to send their kids to school, churches being bombed, hospitals being bombed. It means that there are thousands of people in detention, and we know from evidence that we've collected, many of them in the interrogations are tortured, including sexual violence in detention. We know that some of the offensive operations by different armed groups have been brutal. Villages burned, and often captured combatants or even captured civilians executed.
Was there an increase in violence during voting in the sham election staged by the military?
I can't say that I have those statistics, But what we noticed is an increase in the airstrikes during that period of time, particularly in areas that the military had said it wanted to control, was going to have conduct the elections in. And of course, we saw this increasing arrests of individuals simply for criticizing the elections.
Since Myanmar's military proxy administration took office, has there been an increase or decrease in violence?
Well, there's no question that since the February 21 coup, there's been a great increase in violence. And the people of Myanmar are suffering in many ways. They're suffering from the breakdown in the educational system, in the healthcare system, the economy. Many people don't have enough to eat. And most of all, they're suffering from the violence. Thousands are detained, hundreds and thousands are being killed.
Despite the change in administration, you have not seen a meaningful change on the ground?
Well, certainly the change after the election, we haven't seen any meaningful change on the ground or in the tactics being used.
How have airstrikes deliberately targeting civilians increased during the reporting period?
Well, certainly airstrikes increased. And one of the things we look at, but it's difficult to prove, is that these were targeting civilians. But certainly civilians are the ones that are suffering from these airstrikes overall in much higher proportions than combatants.
Have you found any new evidence about torture, sexual violence, and other abuses in the detention centers?
Yes, our team spends a lot of time working on that, and we regularly receive more information about such crimes. And we're working hard to also identify, to understand the structure of those detention facilities, the chain of command. I think these are cases that are a little easier to prosecute than some others, like artillery strikes or airstrikes. It's easier to identify the individuals directly involved and their superiors. We have identified specific individuals. There are many airstrikes targeting, hitting schools. Children are often the victims of these.
And also the crimes amounting to alleged genocide continue against the Rohingya in Rakhine State. Has anything changed for the Rohingya? Well,
the situation certainly has evolved. I'm not sure in any good way. But the Rohingya, we now see that the Arakan Army controls most of Rakhine State. Most of the 3 northern townships where the Rohingya are from is controlled by the Arakan Army. Rohingya armed groups seem to be more active than they were some years ago. So that conflict, though, is very intense. All the peoples of Rakhine State are suffering. Rakhine, Mo, Dragnet, Rohingya, everyone is suffering in that conflict.
How is the IIMM now investigating crimes committed by non-state armed groups? Are there any you can discuss?
Well, we receive information, sometimes allegations of crimes by non-state armed groups. And if it rises to the level of what could be a serious international crime, we try to investigate it. Now, for some crimes, it's easier for us to investigate than others. So, for example, it's easier for us to contact witnesses that have crossed the border to Bangladesh than it is witnesses who remain inside Rakhine State or inside Shan or Sagai, where it's very difficult for us to contact the individuals. And when we receive this information, we try to talk to those who actually saw and heard the events so we can try to determine what the truth was or get evidence. We sometimes contact the armed group to find out what information they have. Sometimes we've learned that armed groups, and they have said publicly that they have already punished perpetrators of crimes, which is what they should do. And we may ask them to share that information with us. Also, sometimes, which is something I was a bit surprised about at first, is we see sometimes these crimes are appearing on social media. It appears that the perpetrators themselves are proud of the crimes, the executions, the torture, and they put the video on social media. So we've collected that evidence and try to follow up on it to identify the persons responsible.
The IIMM is sharing evidence with the International Criminal Court. Are we ever going to see arrest warrants issued?
I think so. I mean, it's very possible that there already are arrest warrants issued. So the prosecutor announced in November 24 that he was seeking an arrest warrant for Min Aung Hlaing. And at the same time, he said he expected to seek additional arrest warrants in the following months. Now, since then, the ICC has been under a lot of pressure, and a lot has changed because of the Gaza investigation and the high stakes pressure from powerful states. The judges of the ICC have made a decision. They've changed their policy, and they do not want the prosecutor or anyone to speak about warrant applications. Those should be filed confidential, and it would be up to the judges to decide whether or not they're going to make public the status of those warrants. So we heard the prosecutor make that announcement in November 24 before this change of policy. Now the policy has changed, and we don't know if the judges have issued arrest warrants, if they rejected arrest warrants, if they've been asking for additional information before they make the decision. We don't know how many arrest warrants the ICC requested. So I'm afraid we'll just have to be patient for that.
I mean, people in Myanmar have already waited years. What still needs to happen before accountability becomes reality?
Well, a lot needs to happen before accountability. So in this case, for example, on the arrest warrants, one reason the judges may decide they don't want to make them public is they may believe that there's a greater chance of arresting the person if they don't know that there's an arrest warrant. The person may travel to a country, maybe a state party of the ICC, that would follow the order of the court and arrest the person and then bring them to The Hague. So that's a possibility that someday we may see some justice that way. And there's these various initiatives going on around the world, universal jurisdiction cases and financial investigations where hopefully there'd be some measure of justice. And then hopefully one day, Myanmar has a government with courts that want to see justice and would be willing and able to do these cases themselves. I worked at the Khmer Rouge Tribunal before I came to the Myanmar mechanism. The year I left, 2019, we got a judgment against the two of the top three leaders of the Khmer Rouge, Rinchia and Khieu Samphan, for crimes that had been completed 40 years earlier. So justice sometimes can be very slow, but people don't forget the kind of horrendous crimes that happened in Cambodia or those that are occurring in Myanmar. And I think despite the passage of time, it's very important for the country that it deals with those issues, the truth comes out, and some justice is served.
Since you are unable to access Myanmar to carry out your research and investigation, how are you able to continue the work of the mechanism?
Well, certainly it makes the work much more challenging, much more difficult. We've seen in other international investigations around the world the courts that are the most successful are generally the ones with the greatest access, like when you had this court set up for Bosnia, for the former Yugoslavia, NATO was there, and the court's orders were enforced. And they were able to do a lot of trials, a lot of investigations and trials.
In addition to orchestrating the logistics systems was discontinued.
So we think the way we do our work is we do have contact with persons and organizations inside the country. We try to be very, very careful about how we do that because we know it's dangerous. And we only encourage people to try to contact us if they can do it safely. We also have contact with people in other countries around the world where they may be present and conduct interviews when possible with people all around the world. We also use other means besides witness testimony to gather evidence, everything from aerial photographs that can show where villages have been burned, for example, that can show where airstrikes have been carried out. We even have sometimes been able to take some material outside of Myanmar to be forensically examined by laboratories in Western countries. We find a lot of evidence on social media. That's very useful to us. So on the internet in general, there's a great deal of evidence. This is very different. I've worked in 6 other international courts, and it never was so important to be able to use the internet and open source research to gather evidence like it is now. The world has changed. So we're gathering that evidence. We have tens of thousands of videos that we've collected from various sources. So even Rohingya in the clearance operations, their villages were being burned down, and many of them took out their phones and recorded the video of the village being burnt. So we now have developed software and a capability to actually search through videos for specific images that we believe is going to be very helpful to our investigations. So we're trying to evolve, use the modern technology as technology continues to evolve, and do the best despite the lack of access that we have.
Is there anything else you would like to share with the people of Myanmar? How can they reach you if they like to share information?
Yes. I'll give you in a second our signal number and our proton mail address. Our signal number, you should, of course, use Signal to contact us and then erase the message to be safe. And for the proton mail, it has to be, you have to use a proton mail account, which is free to set up in order to contact us. So for Signal, the phone number is +41 76 691 1208. For proton mail, you email us at contact@myanmar-mechanism.org. So you have to send that from a proton mail account for it to be encrypted and secure. And again, we'd encourage you to, after you send the message, to delete it so that it can't be found on any device. But I think the people of Myanmar, those that have information and can share it with us, it'd be very useful. We put your security first. We would only share it with anyone else if you consent. So we ask witnesses, for example, do they consent to sharing their statement with the ICC? Well, what about the ICJ? Some of them might say, I'll share with the ICC, but I don't want ICJ, which is the generals, having access to it. And we would respect their decision. The other thing I would say is that it's very important for us to get information from those that know about the orders that were given and reports that were made. So those who have formerly been in the security services can be our most valuable witnesses. And we're very anxious to always speak to them about, again, how orders were given, how they were carried out, and how reports were made back up to the leadership. Finally, I would say we need the cooperation of states. We ourselves are not a state. We don't have a police force. We can't arrest anyone. We can't protect anyone ourselves, get them out of a country, give them a visa. For that, we need the cooperation of states that are committed to international justice. And many of them have helped us, but I think it's important, particularly for states in the region, to step up and try to help us so that we can one day bring justice for the people of Myanmar.
Nicholas, thank you very much for your time and speaking with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.